This is going to be an audio recording of my D&D character, Halkas Raymere. It's going to be about his backstory. You may be asking, why the fuck does this exist? Well, let me tell you. I got extremely bored, and this is going to be the most sloppy fuck all thing ever. Right? I just have time on my hands and I want to have fun. The images that you're seeing are not my own. I have found them online and then just copied and pasted them in here. So I'm taking no credit for any of that shit. However, like I said, this is the most I don't give a flying fuck type video. I'm just having fun. So yeah, there's something I was going to say and I happen to completely forget about it. But you know what? Fuck it. Doesn't matter. Here we go. I'm going to take a sip of water before we start. Now, we have to mention there will be awkward fucking pauses. Get fucked. Right? I do not care. But here we go. Raymere. Halkas Raymere is what they call me. At least it was what they called me back before everything happened. Raymere looks down at the journal in his hand, slowly caressing the spine as he admires the worn-down, raggedy look of the dark leather that covered those pages. As he opened the cover, he was greeted with rough, brittle paper that was covered in entries upon entries of his times as Halkas. Of his times before the dwarves. Before they took everything. As Raymere carefully, yet briskly, glanced over the passages that he wrote, he was reminded of the horror that was bestowed upon him. The horror of losing all that made him happy, all that he loved, all that he was. What was it for? What was any of it for? He asked. Ever since a young age, he believed in destiny and that regardless of his actions in life, they'd all lead to the same inevitable conclusion. He never knew what outcome was laid in store for him, but as time went on, and the older he got, he started to realize all that was left for him in this accursed world was a tragedy. As a child, Halkas would spend his days in the woods with nothing but himself and the luscious greens of the forest. He could just walk aimlessly for hours on end. He loved every part of the forest that made up his homeland. Nothing made him happier than leaning on a tree and looking out to see animals in their natural habitats. Most of his skills came from watching and studying the animals, learning how to move like them, how to strike like them. One day, Halkas was watching squirrels collect nuts and bring them back to their homes. He noticed how they climbed trees and decided to give it a try, to no avail. But that didn't stop him. He kept trying over and over again. He finally concluded that he was not a squirrel, and that he was just a wood elf. He could think like a squirrel all he wanted. He could move like one as well, but he couldn't perform actions the same way as a squirrel would. He realized he had to perform them as an elf, and so he did. Learning how to climb the tree was only the first hurdle he had to overcome. He soon realized that getting up the tree wasn't that hard. Moving about the tree was the real challenge. After about an hour or two, Halkas was able to fully scale the trunk. However, it took him about a week to be able to fully move about the limbs without falling. After besting his most formidable foe, the art of tree climbing, it opened up a whole new world for little Halkas. He was able to gaze upon the surreal, luscious beauty of the forest. No matter which direction he was looking at, the boundless sea of green seemed to be never-ending. That sure was a sight to behold. There are very few things prettier than those lands in this world, said Raymere as he puts his journal down, and he looks at his surroundings to see nothing but bloodstains and severed limbs as he revels in the beauty of death. He took a look around and notices the piles of mangled corpses that surrounded him. A decapitated head catches his attention, and he just stares into those beautiful brownish-green, soulless eyes that only a young dwarfling could have, as he slowly stands up. Raymere then kicks the head away in a blind fury and says, You people took everything from me, and I won't stop slaughtering your kind until every last one of you is dead. Even you, Moradin. How dare you grant the beauty of the woodlands to your wretched insects of a race? Raymere had been tracking this pack of dwarven mercenaries for many days. Upon catching up to them, without any hesitation, He struck fast and harsh. He spared no expenses when it came to the cost of death. All he cared about was the sheer brutality of the kill. Dwarves robbed him of all he had. He made sure to return the favor. He'd make sure to first attack at the weak points in the armor using a short sword, allowing for swift movement to secure the kill by bludgeoning the sides of their fat, hairy, smelly, and disgusting heads. Carefully paying attention to his enemies, he was able to figure out who their leader was. After massacring the majority of their forces, Raymere happened to notice that the leader's child was with them, a young lad that looked to be no older than 13. He made quick work of the others until there was only 2 doors remaining, the Condottiere and his son. As Kraka Dordain moved to protect his son, Raymere threw his giant club to the side and unsheathed his pair of elven daggers he kept hidden in his boots. His father gave him those daggers as a means to protect himself if danger were to ever come knocking on the doorstep. Dordain motions to this boy to get behind him as he stares into Raymere's deep brown eyes while he slowly approaches closer and closer to the pair. "Run!" Dordain screams as Raymere plunges one of his father's daggers into his right shoulder, rendering it completely useless. Elvis, Dordain's son, just stands still in pure shock. Raymere swiftly unsheaths the dagger from the dwarven flesh. The dwarf attempts to counter with a headbutt right to the sternum. He succeeds, thus causing Raymere to stagger. Dordain then riposted by slamming his mighty hammer into the left arm of that merciless elf. This would have rendered any other combatant's arm useless, but Raymere was no mere combatant. He was fueled by his unquenchable sorrow and his indomitable elvish spirit. Raymere quickly follows Dordain's counter up with a swift jab into the dwarf's armpit, making his left arm completely useless. He swiftly maneuvers behind the dwarf with a sidestep, plunging both of his daggers into the soft flesh at the bottom of his thighs, making Dordain unable to move, thus rendering him completely and utterly useless in a fight. At this point, Dordain, coming to terms with his inevitable death, says to Elvis, "Run, boy. While I might die, you must live. Live, my boy, and tell the story of Kraka Dordain and how he valiantly fought until his final breath was drawn from his lungs and he lay dead on this bloody, gruesome battlefield." Elvis listens and starts to run away. Rather than going after the boy, Raymere grabs Dordain by his hair and drags him to a post and sets him up against it. While he's being dragged, Dordain pleads, "Please, let my boy live. He's innocent. He's barely old enough to hold an axe, let alone wield one in battle." Raymere looks into Dordain's eyes but says nothing. He then walks away into the direction that Elvis ran. "Please, please don't," says Dordain. Knowing the tiny legs of dwarves are meant for going fast over short distances and not a constant jog, Raymere unsheaths his longbow, nocks an arrow, and pulls back, steadying his breath. The land seemed to... Oh. Sorry about that. I had to take a phone call in the middle of all this. Also happened to have lost my spot. Don't know where I was. So I'm probably going to repeat a sentence or two. But, you know what? Fuck it. We ball. So, where was I? "Please, please don't," says Dordain. Knowing the tiny legs of dwarves are meant for going fast over short distances, Raymere unsheaths his longbow, nocks an arrow, and pulls back, steadying his breath. The land seemed to have become still as he aims a shot. With a light exhale, Raymere lets the arrow fly. "Ah!" screams Elvis. Dordain, saying nothing and closely watching Raymere, has been overtaken by shock, knowing his son just got impaled by an arrow. Raymere exits Dordain's peripherals, slowly walking in the same direction he let the arrow fly. About 3 minutes pass before Dordain notices his son's killer walking back towards his way. Except, he notices a body being dragged, but on close examination seems to be a living body. Raymere landed his shot in Elvis's thigh, not killing him but limiting his movement. Dordain exhales in relief, but is cut short when Raymere throws the lad right in front of his father's feet. "What do you want? Asks Dordan. Raymere doesn't respond. He sets Elvis upright on his knees, causing Elvis to scream out in agony due to the pain in his thigh. He then grabs the boy by his hair and makes sure he's staring straight at his father. He then reaches for a dagger that he still had on him. Using his right arm, he raises that dagger plenty high into the sky, and with the force of a ballista, drives the dagger right into the base of Elvis's neck, causing him to start bleeding from the mouth. It was so silent on the battlefield, you could hear the blade pierce through each layer of skin and crack the spine. It was a most beautiful sound, one that a bard would sing along with. "No!" yelled Dordan, in agony from his sight he just beheld. Raymere still sensed life in the little dwarfling. He methodically turns to grab his giant club he threw on the ground earlier in his fighting. Getting ready to deliver the finishing blow, Elvis's body collapses forward onto the ground. This, however, doesn't stop the elf. Raymere, standing behind the boy's body, lifts that club mighty high, and with all the strength in his body, slams down on the defenseless child's head, causing it to split and spray a pool of blood in front of his father, and unleashes a sound similar to that of cracking celery sticks. Stunned by what just happened, Dordan does nothing. Raymere looks to the sky with a blank expression and notices that clouds have rolled in, making the sky a dark and dreary bluish gray. It starts to downpour. Raymere then walks up to Dordan, club in hand, and with all the strength that's left, he brutally swings it into the dwarf's skull with such a force that the post where Dordan was leaned against shattered. As he pulls his club out of the bloody goo that became of Dordan's skull and brain, he's left with a blank expression. In an utterly flat tone, Raymere says, "Give Durin my regards, you fucking stunted rock humper." After collecting his weapons, Raymere then heads east for about an hour until he finds a tree to wait out the storm under. The storm doesn't seem to be passing anytime soon. "May as well just set up camp for the night," he says. As he lies in bed, he revisits the past in his memories and replays the peaceful ones, as if the horrors of the day meant nothing. Before he slumbers, he reaches into his sack and grabs out the journal to read through another entry. "Wow, just wow," said Halkas as he climbed his favorite tree to overlook some of the animals in his part of the woods. Watching them all always leaves him stunned, but today was different from most. He was observing a wolf give birth to 3 little cubs. Halkas watched in pure wholesomeness as these tiny creatures slowly crawled all over their mother. One of them was white, a type of white that was as pure snow. Another was darker, a splendid mix of gray and black. The third was a beautiful tan, the type that blended browns and whites. That one was Halkas' favorite one of all. As the days turned into weeks and the cubs started to roam around without their mother, Halkas overlooked them from above high in the trees. Wherever they went, he went. Raymere put down the journal, looked to the stormy sky, and said, "There would be days where all I'd do was watch them run around the woods. I'd watch them play with each other while patiently waiting for Amrock to bring dinner every night." Amrock was the name I'd given to their mother. The name sounded just as majestic as she was. Ha! How I missed them. Halkas lost his family at a very young age due to disease, so he's been alone most of his life. Watching the wildlife filled his feeling of loneliness inside. He managed to survive off of fishing in the lakes nearby and foraging for edible plants such as berries, just like his father taught him. His father died due to some illness when he was just a child, and his mother didn't make it out of childbirth. Halkas, for the most part, was entirely alone in this world until Amrock gave birth to those beautiful 4-legged blessings of fur. Halkas would then go on to name each of the cubs as well. He named the grayish-black one Shadow, because at night he'd always blend in. Luna would be the name chosen for the white-clad cub. Halkas realized she was a female and decided to pick a name befitting someone of her splendor. Lastly, when it came to naming the remaining tan cub, he couldn't think of anything. So he chose the first name that came to his mind, Akela. He never understood why that came to his mind, but it did, and he wouldn't have asked for any other name. Wow, look at him go! Shadow and Luna are so fast. Come on, Akela, I know you can catch up to them. Every wolf pack has a run. In this case, it would seem that it's Akela. Halkas noticed that. They kept running laps around the same patch of land in the forest. Halkas, being way too curious and wanting to get a better view of Akela, stands up on the branch he was laying on. He tried walking to the edge of it, but a gust of wind rolled through the woods, causing Halkas to lose balance and plummet to the ground below. Halkas lands on his head, causing him to pass out. When he comes to, he's lying on his back, and Akela, using his snout, is nudging Halkas' cheek, trying to see if he's alive. He turns his head to look at the cub, startling Akela and causing him to step back a little. Halkas then sits up, noticing that Shadow and Luna are watching carefully from a safe distance. Then glancing over to Akela, slowly reaches out his hand to signify that he's not a threat. After a moment of hesitation, Akela slowly steps forward, putting his head into Halkas' palm. At that moment, it was almost as if the stars aligned. The two of them felt a connection, a bond like no other. It was like this sort of brotherly bond that can never be severed. Off to their left, Halkas realized Amarok has returned with tonight's feast for the pups. She drops the dead doe that she caught earlier, Luna and Shadow still carefully watching from a distance. Amarok looks around to see Halkas' palm on top of Akela's head. She grits her teeth and lets out a low growl as she slowly walks towards Akela. When she gets about 10 feet away, Halkas slowly puts up his other hand to show that he means no harm, Amarok staring directly into his eyes. He then also removes his hand away from Akela. Upon doing so, he lets out a little yip, implying he still wanted to be held. Akela catches his mother's attention with that burst of sound. She doesn't stop. As she gets closer and closer to her pup and Halkas, Akela runs around and moves to the front of his newfound friend. Halkas realizes that Akela is in front of him in an attempt to protect him from the beautiful, yet formidable foe in front of them. Amarok stops walking forward when she gets about a foot away from them. She motions at Akela to get him to move. Akela stands his ground. Amarok walks forward until she's right over Akela. She bends her head down and grabs Akela by the scruff of his neck. She then just moves him out of the way before returning to Halkas. Halkas puts his hand out once again at Amarok to show that he's not hostile. She barks at him aggressively. He does not budge. She barks again, and yet again, Halkas doesn't budge. Halkas stands up, inching toward her, and reaches to put a hand on the back of her head, just like what he was doing with Akela. She bites down on his arm. Rather than yelling out in pain, getting upset, getting aggressive, Halkas remains calm and returns her bite with just a smile, and he says, "It's okay. It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you, or Akela, or Shadow, or Luna. I see the marks on the doe. I know you didn't bite me with all your strength." Akela starts rubbing his head on Halkas' leg, and then proceeds to sit on his foot. Amarok, still having her mouth on his arm, takes that as her son trying to tell her, "He's a good guy." Halkas then puts out his other hand and attempts to rest his hand on her again. This time, she allows it. When his hand reaches her, she stares intently into his eyes. He does the same. He then moves to pet her. She's hesitant at first, but allows it. Shadow and Luna, still watching from a distance, look at each other and then collectively trot towards their mother and the stranger. When they reach their mom, they kind of hide behind her. Amarok then turns around and heads to the doe she killed. All the cubs run ahead of her. After walking for a little ways, she turns to Halkas, noticing that he did not follow. She then motions for him to join them. He obliged. He sits next to them while they dine for the night. Amarok offered him meat, but Halkas turned it down. She devours it instead. Then Halkas ended up staying the night with them. Eventually, he ended up staying with the pack for quite a while, almost as if he joined their pack. As the days went on, he started to follow Amrock around while she hunted for that night's meal. Upon securing a kill, Helka started to carry Amrock's kill so that way she wouldn't have to drag it on all the way back to their den. Whenever they'd return, Akela would go crazy and just pounce on Helkas, giving him all the hugs and kisses he'd ever need. Helkas finally started to feel like he wasn't alone anymore, and that he found his new family. As time went on, both Shadow and Luna also opened up to Helkas and started playing with him, sleeping next to him, and treating him as one of their own. Seeing her cubs starting to spend more and more time with Helkas, it made Amrock relieved. She's been getting tired more quickly, and she was already quite old when giving birth to her litter. The days have been getting longer and harder for her. When Helkas joins her in her hunts, excuse me, he's been starting to realize this himself. On one fateful morning, while the cubs are asleep, Amrock nudges Helkas awake and motions him to follow her. They went out on a hunt like usual, but Helkas felt like something was off. The way Amrock acted, the way she moved, it was as if she was trying to tell Helkas something. Helkas realized that she was trying to teach him how to hunt like she does. She knows Helkas is skilled in hunting with his weapons, but she wants him to know how to hunt like a wolf does, how to move like one, how to act like one, but most importantly, how to strike like one. She knew she didn't have much time left, and her little ones still had a lot to learn. In her absence, she trusted Helkas to look after them until they come of age. Helkas, being extremely adaptive and perceptive, was able to understand and use the basics of what Amrock was trying to teach him. At nights, he would sneak out of the den and hone his skills until they were perfected. Helkas, at this point, decided that this was his home. Before, this felt like a home away from home, but not anymore. It was as if he became a part of their family, and he couldn't be any happier. He slowly but surely came to the realization that for the first time in a very long while, he was happy. The next time they go out for a hunt, Helkas takes point. Amrock lets him do his thing and carefully watches behind him. As she's observing, Helkas pays no mind. While she's watching him, she realizes that his foreign elf is interpreting a wolf. He's doing it with such close detail that he himself could pass as a wolf. He's stalking his prey like one, watching his surrounding like one would. And when he's found his prey, he delivers the killing blow swiftly, just like one would. Amrock was relieved by this. She knew that if she were to pass, her cubs would be in good hands. Helkas secured a giant buck and a little fawn for dinner. Helkas brings the buck while Amrock drug the fawn. Helkas noticed that Amrock, who was once able to drag the mightiest of bucks home, seemed to struggle a bit when it came to dragging the little fawn back. As the days went on, Helkas paid more and more attention to her, and he started noticing that she wasn't keeping up like she used to. So because of this, when they'd wake up in the mornings to go on their hunts, Helkas would graze her beautiful pelt with his hand and let her know that it's okay. Go back to rest. I can take care of the hunting for today. This happened more than once. The more this happened, the less opposed she was to it. At first, she would always refuse, and it took Helkas many attempts to get her to listen. On the days that she would stay back, she'd go back to rest, and then be woken up by 3 lovely wolves that would all be staring at her, with their heads slightly tilted while they'd have the beadiest eyes. She noticed that despite being right next to her, her pups always seemed to be slightly lonely. They'd run and play like no tomorrow, almost as if they had limitless energy. But Amrock found herself being fond of their energy. Whenever Helkas would return, they'd dig into their dinner and then finally settle down. Upon return, Helkas would always spend time with them, but after a while he'd go and lean on Amrock and just talk with her about everything and anything. They couldn't understand what each other were saying, but they understood the emotions they were relaying. Helkas never really understood his relations with his pack. He never knew how he was viewed. Was he viewed as big brother? As a father figure to the pups? An uncle to them? Out of all the questions he had, what always weighed on his mind the most was how Amrock viewed him. He settled on an answer for all of his questions. It didn't matter. He said to himself it didn't matter how they viewed him. All he knew was that both he, and them were happy. And that's what mattered most. Many, many moons had passed, and the day that Halkas dreaded most had finally come. Emrock was on her last legs, and Halkas knew it. Emrock woke up before him one morning, and they nudged him awake. They just stared into each other's eyes for a bit, then she went to leave their den. Halkas follows. When they're both outside, she stands still, then turns to look at Halkas. Sorrow in her eyes, she finally turns around. Fuck. I skipped a line. Son of a bitch. And then she went to leave their den. Halkas follows. When they're both outside, she stands still, then turns to look at Halkas, who had now grown to be about 5'10". She stares at him, and he realizes that she has a touch of sorrow in her eyes. She finally turns around and walks to Halkas. When she reaches him, he kneels. He knew this day was coming, so when she's right next to him, he leans in and puts his forehead against hers and slowly pets the back of her head and then some. They both knew what was happening. Neither of them wanted it, and neither of them could stop it. Once that was over, she slowly walks away and heads to the forest. About 50 meters away, she turns her head to look at her newest family member one last time. She gives him a look of approval, and it tells him that she trusts him completely, that it's his turn to watch over the pack now. A single tear starts to culminate in his eye, and it slowly slides down his right cheek. She then walked away. For good. As she walks, Halkas says, struggling to form his words, "Thanks for everything. I promise I won't let you down. I promise." Halkas then turns to solemnly walk back inside. Akela, Luna, and Shadow were all sleeping in one giant pile of fluff. Halkas walks over to them, collapses to his knees, and leans over to hug all of them. This breaks him. As he holds them, his eyes become gray clouds on a dreary day, and the clouds started to bear down one hell of a heavy rain. A kind of rain that wouldn't let up soon. Raymere, finished reading through the journal entry, closes it, and blows out the candle next to him. He had just relived one of the saddest parts of his life. As he falls asleep that night, he lets a single tear roll down his face. He wakes up the next morning, and he sees that the storm has passed. He sets out east to continue on his quest to bask in Moradin's blood. Raymere, however, understands how the world works. It's never as easy as it may seem. For Raymere's sake, he may be a lone wolf, but he's willing to join a pack if it helps further his own goals. After last night, he spends most of his days walking around the lands admiring the luscious greens and the wildlife around him. There was no violence, no unnecessary killing, but most importantly, there was no pain except that which was inside of him. As the day draws to an end, he decides to climb up one of the largest coniferous trees that he finds. He climbs up quite high, and unlike when he was a child, he stands up on the highest branch and looks out to just admire the natural splendor that the world could hold. While he's up there, he notices buildings about a mile due north. He now knew where he was headed, and he knew that he was close. Why not spend some time and enjoy this place for a while, he thought. Halkas grabs a rope out of his bag and ties himself to the trunk of the tree to make sure he doesn't fall off while he sleeps there for the night. Before the sun goes fully down, he reaches for his journal to read yet another entry out of it before he goes to bed. Some time has passed since losing Amarok. Halkas has been taking care of the pups now, fully grown, and has been teaching them just like how he was taught. Shadow and Luna are still practically inseparable, doing everything together. Akela, however, seems to be getting along more and more with the two. Halkas started spending more and more of his days up in the trees again, just watching over everything. As he got older, he got more and more curious as to why he never saw anybody else. He thought back to when he was just a wee lad, and his dad took him away from their village. He couldn't remember why, but he knew his father was running, fleeing from something or someone. Next thing he knew, it was just him and his father alone in this forest. He always wondered why there wasn't anyone. But he remembered one thing his father told him. You have no enemies. Don't go looking for them. So Halkas was fine with the emptiness of the forest. After all, he's got his family and he couldn't be happier. When he'd be up high watching over everything, sometimes he'd get bored and just watch his pack from above. He noticed how clever they got and how much they've learned from him. He'd see them swiftly running through the woods, and when they'd come across an animal, they'd slow down immensely so that they could stalk them. Sometimes they'd snag themselves some meal, other times they'd just watch carefully from a distance. At nights, Akela would leave his siblings and go rest next to Halkas. Whenever this happened, Halkas seemed to be filled to the brim with light. This was always his happiest part of the day. Excuse me. When he was just sitting against the wall in their den, Akela would come over, lie down, and then just gracefully rest his head on Halkas' legs. Halkas would always pet his fur and gently rub him from his head down to as far as his hand could reach. It was pure bliss. Huh? What's that? Halkas said as he starts hearing the ground rumble while he's in his den. What was even more odd was that neither Akela, Shadow, or Luna were around. He grabs his bow and his daggers before stepping outside to see smoke in the sky off in the distance. As he stands there looking at the smoke, he notices the rumbling getting louder and louder. Rushing to the nearest tree, Halkas scales the trunk at a blistering pace. Now at the top, he looks around and notices roughly 20 to 30 figures that look to be small but very thick and burly, chasing after Shadow, Luna, and Akela. Raymere puts down his journal for a sec and looks into the distance and asks himself, why were they being chased? They were always so cautious. What did they do? Raymere just sat there for a while, dwelling on all the possibilities before coming to the realization that it didn't matter. What's been done can't be undone. Only thing to do now is just keep moving forward. After a few moments of sitting there, he picks his journal back up and continued to read. Halkas, observing from the top of the tree, sees that these figures catch up to Shadow, and he hears a very loud wince. Upon hearing this noise, something within him clicked. It was as if his body was being possessed by another soul. Halkas was accelerating at top speeds as he jumped from branch to branch. He was moving faster than he's ever moved before he even realized that he caught up to the ground and sees that Shadow is being trampled over. He notices that Luna and Akela are slowing down, but so is this troop of hostiles. Next thing he knows, they're right on Luna's tail, and as they go to swing their weapon to put an end to the animal's life, as one of the figures goes to swipe at Luna, he gets impaled by an arrow in his right eye, rendering him dead immediately. Halkas then knocks another arrow and sends it flying into the neck of the figure next to his previous target. When the third figure goes to swipe at Luna, they succeed by jamming their axe into her hind left thigh, causing her to cry out in pain. At this point, Akela has gained a bit of a lead on the group so that the majority of them follow. Some stay back to finish off the beautiful white wolf. Something within Halkas told him that he could trust Akela, so he did. Sorry for the pause. I realized there was some formatting issues. Alright, sorry about that. Continuing on. He focused his attention to taking out the remaining hostile forces that were starting to surround Luna. He takes out 2 more with the swift arrow shots, but as he goes to knock his third, he finds that his quiver is empty. Stand true, boys. Us dwarves don't go down that easily. Upon hearing that, Halkas figures out what these figures were. He jumps down into the fray and hears one of the dwarves say, Oi, would you look at that? It's just a young elf. He doesn't look much past 15. Durin, one of the dwarves, takes note of Halkas' appearance. He's quite scrawny, doesn't look to have too much meat on his bones. What do you say, boys? Let us dye his brown hair red. Halkas unsheaths his daggers, and the dwarves make their attack. Halkas evades the first dwarf. Another goes to attack. He ducks under the dwarf's blade, allowing for a swift counter with his dagger. Halkas, no, someone else, drives his blade right into the side of the dwarf. He then quickly strikes again with his other dagger and slams the blade into the dwarf's eye socket. As he goes to unsheath the dagger from the dagger pulls their eye out and makes the most heinous sound as the optical nerve is ripped from the brain. One down. Who's next? Durin replied, Ha! Look at this forest fungus. He thinks he can take us out. I think we have something to say to that. This time, two dwarves rush at him. One of them manages to get a shallow cut on the elf, and the other one misses completely. The elf goes to take out the one that missed completely. He succeeds. Only 3 more left. Please, Luna, hold on just a bit longer, said the elf. Luna? Why'd you call this walking pelt by a name? Said Durin. That is no walking pelt, replied the elf. Yeah? Then what is it? Dinner? No. Then tell me, boy, what are they to you? Luna is my sister. Durin burst into laughter. Ha! How pathetic! That's a wolf. That is no elf. You couldn't possibly be related. Upon hearing Durin's outcry of laughter, the elvish body that was once home to Halkas is overtaken by the same forces before. This time, he's wrought with unquenchable fury. He crouches down. The battlefield goes silent. He looks to his left and notices that a falling leaf is about to touch ground. He then looks straight at the dwarf who cut him. As the leaf lands, the elf dashes forward, and within the blink of an eye, he slit the dwarf's throat. Focusing all his attention to the next dwarf, he fails to notice that Durin has snuck up behind him. As the elf goes to make his next attack, Durin, swinging his axe, manages to tear apart some of Halkas' skin on his left arm. The elf shouts out in pain. This doesn't stop him, though. Still moving forward, he then goes to strike at the other dwarf. He manages to get a hit in on the other leg, but this required him to lean into the strike. The dwarf uses this opportunity to slam his fists into the elf, sending him to the ground with a thud. Nice one, shouted Durin. Halkas, on the ground, uses this opportunity to shove a blade right into the dwarf's crotch. He makes many quick cuts, causing him to rain blood from the scrotum area. Sending the dwarf into shock and rendering him useless, all that remained was Durin, and an elf that had an unquenchable wrath. Look at what you did. All of this murder. For what? Some stupid wolf? She's not just any wolf. Durin cuts him off. She's my sister. Look, kid. You're an elf. They're a wolf. You're not family. Halkas is starting to return to his senses. You don't have to be related by blood to be family. That's the dumbest shit I've ever heard. An animal and a person will never be family. Says who? Who are you to decide who is and isn't family? Who am I? I'm Durin Dorden. My brother is the great Kraka Dorden, one of the best condottieri ever to walk this world. I have every right to tell you what family is. Sorry, but I don't know who the fuck that is. He's the toughest man I know. The bond we share is stronger than the toughest metal. Oh yeah? Halkas, without any hesitation, runs to a body of a felled dwarf and grabs an arrow. Durin raises his mighty hammer and pushes it and rushes to Halkas while his back is turned. What do you think you're doing? Durin winds up an attack, but Halkas rolls aside, dodging it. Halkas then breaks for his bow, lying on the ground about 10 meters to his left. As he reaches it, Durin once again tries to use the same attack. Halkas swiftly knocks an arrow and lets it fly right into Durin's neck just as he gets slammed by Durin's hammer. The two foes traded blows. Halkas left Durin gasping for air. Durin left Halkas with a shattered arm. The dwarf stumbles back a few feet before falling backwards onto the ground. Halkas stands up, clenches his dagger, and walks toward Durin. As the elf approaches, Durin snaps the arrow that's lodged in his throat. Unable to say anything, he's left helpless, and Halkas kneels on his chest. This is how strong our bond is, says Halkas. before plunging his dagger straight into Durin's chest. Ha ha ha! You thought that could kill me? You'll have to try harder than that. Halkas, filled with rage again, pulls out his dagger and slams it into the dwarf's skull. At first, it doesn't go all the way through, so he slams it again and again and again, until eventually it split the skull and the blade went straight into the brain of the lifeless husk of a dwarf. Without even thinking about what he just did, Halkas walks over to Luna and puts a hand on her. They look each other in the eyes, and Halkas is overtaken with sadness, knowing that she wasn't going to make it. Rather than letting her suffer any longer, Halkas pulls her in close, and then using his other dagger, swiftly submerges it into her neck, putting her out of her misery. Halkas just sits there knowing that the 2 out of his 3 siblings has been killed. He doesn't shed a single tear. Eventually, the other dwarves came back to find everyone but Halkas is dead. In a fury, one of the dwarves goes to kill the defenseless elf that's just standing there, but somebody stops him and suggests why not take him prisoner instead. So they did. Halkas was taken to their camp, stripped of all of his weapons. He's thrown into a cell. The dwarves had no care for Halkas, his well-being. All they had to worry about was that their prisoner, slave, if you will, was well enough to be able to do what was needed. They used him day in and day out. They used him for labor, for comedy, but worst of all, they used him for their needs. Only being served 2 meals of utter slop for days on end, Halkas began losing his sense of self. This would continue on for weeks upon weeks upon weeks, eventually turning into years. It got to the point where he practically became a walking corpse, having no sense of self. He only ever did what they commanded, whatever it may be. He did all this until one fateful day. On this day, everything shattered. A dwarf walks up to the cage that Halkas has been imprisoned in and says, "You won't believe what we captured today." Unlocking the cage, the dwarf grabs Halkas and drags him into the main area of their camp. Halkas sees a very familiar tan creature lying next to the fire pit. It was Akela. The dwarves manage to capture and subdue him just for this very moment. When Halkas realizes who it is, life seems to return to him. One of the dwarves notices their slave attempt to crawl over to his long-lost friend. He quickly puts a stop to that by delivering a stern kick into Halkas' side. "Don't get any bright ideas. Free will is not something we permit you to have," said the dwarf who dragged him there. "Get on with it, Thurnham. You're the one who dragged him here after all," shouted a dwarf, the now building crowd. Thurnham tosses his giant club to the side and grabs his axe. Looming above Akela, Thurnham, axe in hand, gets Halkas' attention and says, "For Durin," and plunges his axe into Akela's forehead, killing the beautiful creature in one swift blow. Everyone goes silent, except Halkas. Halkas bursts out into laughter. For about a minute, no one said anything. Everyone was in utter shock that he was laughing. They all just stood there, staring at the slave that they'd been abusing for the better half of 2 years. Even scrawnier than when they met, his once brown hair now turned gray from the torture and abuse and all the stress. Their slave stands up on his own 2 feet, and in this very moment, Halkas was dead. What stood there was not their slave, but a simple creature that when you looked into his eyes seemed to have a demon within him, a demon of nothingness. This creature standing before them, was as still as a mountain. As he stood there, his eyes narrowed on the club that Thurnham threw aside. He then looked straight at Thurnham as he walks forward very methodically. He goes to pick up the giant club. As he grabs it, Thurnham asks, "What do you think you're going to do with that?" Rather than replying with words, he responds with actions. He winds the club up and slams it into the side of Thurnham's skull, killing him on direct impact. Fuck Durin. The rest of the crowd is left in awe as the scrawny elf slowly walks to gather his belongings on the side of the camp. With all of his things and his new club, no one dared stop him as he walked out of the camp, never to be seen again by these dwarves. I am Halkas no more. He died alongside his brethren when he broke his promise to Amarok and let his family die. Where he was weak, I shall be strong. Sorry, Father, but now I do have enemies, and I will make sure they get what they're owed. From here on out, I shall take my family name as my own. My name is Raymere. I vow to strike down any foe that opposes me, starting with you, Crack-a-Door Den. Raymere puts down his journal and decides to stop reminiscing on the past. He goes to bed that night peacefully. Upon waking up, he's greeted with a beautiful sunrise and sets out for the nearby town. Little did he know, upon reaching this town, he manages to get himself roped into one mighty ride. The end. There you go. That was it. Kind of had to split this up in between two different recording sessions because my computer died once. But it is what it is. I hope everyone enjoyed this. I said I might edit it. That's fucking bullshit. I'm probably not. I'm just going to probably mash the two audios together because I kind of just have this image up. Sorry for never changing. But fuck you. But yeah, that was it. This was all for a D&D contest that our DM is doing. This is my first ever campaign, and he he spiced it up with a little contest. The contest was for whoever could make the best backstory gets an extra starting item. Not something that will break the game, but something that's really nice to have. This is being recorded after that contest, and all the winners have been announced. And there was first, second, and third place all getting items. I managed to take first place with the story of Raymere. My item I got was some life ring where it just heals me every other turn. It heals me, whatever, a little bit here and there. Second place went to a different player of ours. He was given 2 healing items. One of them is a ring, one of them is a cloak. And our third place was given a coupon. Just a simple coupon. It will be useful to the story at one point, but we don't know what. So he may or may not have just been granted the greatest gift of all. But here was my backstory. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Take care. This will be me signing off.